wife's from Russia. So Fritz is sitting there going, holy smokes, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. Now, I'll just give you a prelude here because we'll talk about it earlier. Oswald actually spent 3 years in Russia, from 1959 to 1962. He left the United States and went to Russia and tried to renounce his American citizenship and gain Russian citizenship. A whole nother story for a whole nother day. But you need to know that he did that. And when he was there, he married a Russian woman and brought her home. Okay, her name was Marina. And we'll talk about that later. And as soon as he got back to the United States from Russia, what organization had him under surveillance all the time? The FBI. This is during the Cold War. Some guy goes over to Russia and brings back a Russian wife, they're going to be paying attention to you. Okay? Especially when you're former what? What was he in? I didn't tell you this, but figure it out. What was he in? The military. He was in the Marine Corps prior to going to Russia. So, I mean, the red flags just go up like crazy, right? Well, the reason that Oswald was so mad at Hosty is because 2 weeks before the assassination, Hosty actually went to Irving, Texas to visit because he thought Oswald was living there. Why? Because that's what he put on his application form when he went to work at the Texas School Book Depository. So the FBI were following this guy. 2 weeks before the assassination, FBI agent Hosty actually went to Irving, Texas, to this house to try to find Oswald. And you know who the home belonged to? A lady by the name of Ruth Paine. And here's a picture right here of Ruth Paine. And she was friends with Mrs. Oswald, had made acquaintances. She had separated from her husband. Lee Oswald was a wife abuser, and when they separated, Mrs. Paine invited Marina to come and live at her house, while her husband lived where? In the boarding house. Well, when Hosty arrived at that address, who answered the door? Ruth Paine. And when Ruth Paine answered the door, Hosty discovered that Oswald's wife Marina was living there with her 2 children. As I mentioned, Lee and Marina were separated at the time of the assassination. Mrs. Paine had befriended Marina. She was also separated from her husband, so she invited Marina and her 2 children to live with her in Irving at the time. Well, what's the first thing he asked Marina? Where's your husband? And her answer is, he doesn't live here. So what's your next question, Hosty asks? How do I get in touch with him? Where does he live? And this is no kidding, they weren't lying. Neither Ruth Paine nor Marina Oswald, either one knew where he was living. They had no idea where he was living. Marina Oswald and Lee Oswald were estranged, separated. They did see each other, and I'll explain that in a bit. But she didn't know his whereabouts. She didn't know where he was staying. He told her he lived in a boarding house, but she didn't know where. She's a Russian girl. She doesn't know one end of Dallas from the other, or anywhere else, or Irving. Okay? So neither Marina nor Ruth Paine knew the address of Oswald's boarding house in Oak Cliff. And so what did Hosty leave Marina? And told her to call him if he found out, if she had talked to Lee or let him know he wanted to get in touch with him. What did he leave her? Business card. So Hosty finally left Marina one of his business cards and asked her to say, hey, tell Lee to call me as soon as he gets back so we can talk. Next time you talk to him, here, give him this number and have him call me. Well, what did Marina give Hosty? She didn't give him the address of where he lived because she didn't know. So she gave him the address of what? That's right, the Texas School Book Depository, which he already knew. Well, think about it. This is why Oswald is mad. After he talked to Marina, and she said, Lee, there was an FBI agent out here looking for you. Here's his card. You're supposed to call him. He considered that harassing his wife. And that's where he blew up when he heard Hosty's name in this interrogation, because he knew he was the guy that had gone out and visited his wife looking for him. Okay? Now, this is kind of a crazy story, but I'm going to tell you anyway, so bear with it the best you can. Well, imagine what Agent Hostie's thought process was on November 22nd when he discovers that Lee Harvey Oswald is in custody for the assassination of the president. This was a guy that he was responsible to surveil, so to speak, this time, and he's the one who ends up shooting the president. So as soon as he hears that, he decides, boy, I better get in these files and review some of these files to see if my ass is in a ringer, to be quite frank with you. So he gets in this file, and he discovers a new file that came in 2 days prior to the assassination, which he really didn't pay any attention to at the time. Picture this. It's November 22nd. The president's been assassinated. A guy that you were supposed to be surveilling has shot the president. So he gets in the file and says, oh my God, did I miss something with this guy? Well, a file came in 2 days before the assassination, and it was a letter that Oswald had written to the Soviet embassy. Okay, it was a letter that Oswald had written to the Soviet embassy. And in that letter, Oswald mentioned that he had been in Mexico City trying to get a visa to both Cuba and the Soviet Union by visiting their embassies there. So he went to Mexico City in September, and this is we'll get into that later. But he was a crazy bastard. I'm telling you, this guy was nuts. And before the assassination, he actually traveled to Mexico City and went to the Cuban embassy, and he went to the Soviet embassy and tried to get visas to go back to those two countries. He wanted to go to either one of them. He was a huge communist sympathizer, okay? And he was denied in both areas. He went to the Soviet embassy, and he went to the Cuban embassy, and he tried to get visas to fly from Mexico City to either Cuba or back to Russia, because he had already been there. Okay? Now we'll get into this later, because I mean, this just gets nuts. But the stage I'm setting is why Hosty came in the first place to talk to Oswald that day, right? Why did he even show up? Well, this is why. In that letter, Oswald stated he had visited a guy by the name of Valery Kostelkov, which is on your ID sheet. In the letter that he wrote, that was in the file, that came in 2 days before the president's assassination, it stated in that letter that Oswald had visited a fellow by the name of Valery Kostelkov while he was where? In Mexico City. Now, here's an interesting thing. You know who this Valery Kostelkov was? What's the name sound? He was the Russian in charge of all political assassinations in the Western Hemisphere. I'm not kidding you. Oswald visited with this guy while he was in Mexico City trying to get a visa to both Cuba and the Soviet Union. He's visiting with a guy that sets up political assassinations in the Western Hemisphere. And the FBI know who this guy is. So what's Hosty thinking now when he gets in this file? My God, did the Russians have Oswald shoot Kennedy? This would lead us into World War III. This is the reason why he showed up abruptly at room 317 of homicide and robbery, because he wanted to talk to Oswald. You see what I'm saying? So here's, we're kind of getting backwards, but here's Fritz having a really nice conversation, and all of a sudden here comes James Hosty kind of busted in. Oswald goes nuts because of the name, but the reason why Hosty came there in the first place is he's picked up this new information and found out that Oswald had a conversation with the guy that sets up political assassinations from Russia across the Western Hemisphere. So what does Hosty want to interview Oswald to find out? What? Yeah, are you involved in a plot? A Soviet-Cuban plot to kill the president? Because whose butt's in a sling if he is? Hosty's in big trouble. So after Hosty walked into the interrogation and Oswald got upset, Fritz had to try to calm Oswald down, and Hosty simply backed off and went and sat and listened while he continued the interrogation. Okay? That's a long way to get to the story, but that's it. So Agent Hosty backs off. He does not want to step on Fritz's toes, and he tells Captain Fritz that he'll explain why later he's there. Does Fritz have any idea why he showed up? No. And Fritz might be interested to know that, since he's thinking he didn't even know that Marina Oswald, a Russian gal, was his wife that was brought back to the United States. So it just gets crazy. So the interrogation continues, okay? But you need to know the FBI part of that, because that's going to come in later. Okay, so now, in the room, who do you have? Hosty, Oswald, and Fritz. And Hosty's backed off, he's just listening. So the interrogation continues. Okay? Well, after this exchange between Oswald and Hosty, Captain Fritz continues his interview with Oswald, and Hosty sets in on the interview and listens. Fritz asks Oswald at this point 3 direct questions. He says, boom, boom, boom. Yep.
Are we in the next subject?
Yeah, the interrogation continues. So, Fritz is going to ask Oswald just 3 direct questions. 1, do you work in the school book depository? 2, do you have access to all rooms in the depository? And 3, why did you leave the depository? So bang, 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 Fritz asks him 3 quick questions. Do you work in the school book depository? Do you have access to all rooms in the depository? And why did you leave the depository? So those are 3 questions that Fritz asked Oswald. Bang, bang, bang. Again, do you work in the school book depository? Do you have access to all rooms in the depository? And why did you leave the depository? Which of those questions would require a yes or no answer? 1 and 2. And he answers yes to those first two questions. Do you work in the school book depository? Yes. Do you have access to all rooms in the depository? Yes. Concerning the 3rd question, he stated that he didn't think there'd be any more work at the depository after the assassination. He thought they would close down, so he simply left. That was the answer to that. Okay? So he says, did you work at the school book depository? Yes. Do you have access to all rooms in the depository? Yes. Why did you leave the depository? Well, I just figured there wouldn't be any more work after the assassination. They'd closed down, so I left. What's Fritz's next question? Where'd you go? Yeah, where'd you go? And he stated he went to his boarding house to change clothes, get his gun, and go to the movies. That's what he told Fritz. I'm not making that up. He said to Fritz, I went to my boarding house to change clothes, pick up my gun, and go to the movies. That's what he told Fritz. What do you think Fritz's first question after that was? Why would you take a gun to the movies? I mean, you could follow this. You could beat Fritz and ask the same, why would you take a gun to the movies? And he says, because I felt like it. That's exactly what he said. Because I felt like it. This guy is just really incredible. So again, Fritz asked him what he did. He said he went to his boarding house to change his clothes, get his gun, and went to the movies. When asked why he would take a gun to the movies, Oswald responded, because I felt like it. Well, Oswald admitted pulling his pistol at the theater. He said, it was the wrong thing to do, and they really clocked me for it, and I deserved what I got. I mean, that's basically what he said. So he asked him, did you pull your gun at the theater? And he agreed, he admitted he did it. He admitted, I was wrong. But I was really clocked for it. Remember? Paul Bettany gave him the old shot across the face. And he said, I deserve what I got. So Fritz asked Oswald 3 more questions. All required a yes or no answer. 1, did you bring a rifle to work? 2, do you own a rifle? And 3, did you ever own a rifle? So the next 3 questions that Fritz pounds him with. Did you bring a rifle to work? Did you own a rifle? Did you ever own a rifle? And guess what he answered all 3 questions? No. Because what are they trying to do here, kids? They're trying to tie Oswald to the murder weapon, the rifle. Okay? And he answers no to all 3 questions. Do you bring a rifle to work? No. Did you own a rifle? No. Did you ever own a rifle? No. And then he asked him if he ever received any firearms training. And he said yes. He did receive training in the Marine Corps, because he was a Marine at one time, remember the Marine Corps. So Fritz then asked him if he ever received any firearms training, and he said he did receive training in the Marine Corps. Well, then he asked him the big question. He said, Lee, did you shoot the president? He asked him the big question. Lee, did you shoot the president? Oswald answered, no, I emphatically deny that. Lee, did you shoot the president? No, I emphatically deny that. What's the next question you ask? Thank you. Did you shoot a police officer in Oak Cliff? And Oswald muttered, no, I deny that too. So what does Fritz know right away? He's a damn what? Liar. Because they got him on them. There's no question he shot Tippit. None. Okay? So he said, did you shoot the officer in Oak Cliff? And he said, no, I deny that too. Well, finally, FBI agent Hosty just has taken, he's been listening to this crap long enough, and he's just nervous, because look what he's got on the line. Finally, he just taken, he goes, have you ever been to Mexico City? He asked him, have you ever been to Mexico City? Because he wants to find out if you met with this assassin, right? Have you ever been to Mexico City? Well, Fritz kind of had to step in, get Hosty settled down a little bit, and he repeated Hosty's question. He said, Lee, have you ever been to Mexico City? He says, yeah, I've been to Mexico. Well, I was in the Marine Corps. Isn't that stupid? He said, yeah, I've been to Mexico when I was in the Marine Corps. Well, Hosty clarified, I mean Mexico City, not Mexico. Oswald replied, what makes you think I've been to Mexico City? I've never been there. Well, Hosty now knows he's lying, because he's got a letter from him saying he was there. Okay, so he wants to push him a little more, wants to get after him. When you think you get a guy in the line, then you can get after him a little more. Well, he gets interrupted by a police officer who walks into the room and tells Captain Fritz that the first lineup is ready. So before Hosty can press him anymore, a police officer comes in to the interrogation room and tells Captain Fritz that the first lineup was ready. Now, we're going to stop there, but I'm going to tell you what a lineup is. You have to understand this. A lineup is where they're going to take Oswald in with other people, and they're going to line them up in a lineup, and they're going to have a bright light in their face, and there's going to be a window, so to speak, or glass, and then witnesses that they pick are going to say, is that the guy you saw at the Tippit murder? What, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which guy did you see? I saw number 4. I saw number 2. And the witnesses cannot see the people that they're looking at, the people that are being in the lineup cannot see the witnesses that are out there testifying against them. So they're going to bring in Oswald and 4 what? Maybe other prisoners, other people, and they're going to bring the lineup. There's going to be 3 different lineups before we're done here. This will be the first. And I want you to think, who might be the one that is going to be the witness in the first lineup? Who's going to be? There you go. Alan Mark. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Nice job. Pretty crazy, isn't it? Going to get crazier, too. It's going to get crazier and crazier.